Hey everybody, Ty here. I hope everyone is doing well. Feeling better than I am right now. It's been a rough 24 hours here in this end. Definitely not feeling all that great. So that's why I didn't have a video up yesterday. We're feeling rough, but we're trying to keep it going. Yesterday I just couldn't do it. Hopefully I can today. Hopefully you'll get to see this one. But obviously, we're going to be talking tropics today. It's been about a week since we've done a tropical outlook and a few days since we've done a tropical update. And there have been some notable changes. Hence, look to the top right hand corner of your screen. That's actually Gabrielle. If you saw the tropical update a few days prior, you would know that this thing looked like absolute garbage. Like it was ready to kill over any second. But looks like now Gabrielle has kind of gotten her feet under her. Now it's starting to look pretty good. You can actually see a low level circulation with it, a lot of venting between with these thunderstorms, and maybe even the early signs of maybe an eye developing here. Even though we're still pretty early into the tropical storm phase, it has maintained its 50-mile-per-hour status here as a tropical storm, which it even did while the wind shear was tearing it apart from the west side and north sides of the storm. But if we actually go ahead and take a look at not really model guidance, but look at the forecast cone along with its intensity, this is forecast to become a hurricane, which is pretty impressive considering just how bad it looked about 48 hours earlier. This is not going to make an impact to Bermuda, other than the obvious here, the increased surf and maybe some rip currents. Not going to be really much of a factor to anyone as far as the lower 48 is concerned. Nothing to be worried about there. At the most, we might get some rip currents, but that's about it. The storm might not even be strong enough to really do that at this point. This is going to pretty much end up remaining a fish storm, which is great news. This is kind of how we want it to be. If you happen to be out in the shipping lanes, however, you might want to keep an eye on that. But other than that, that's really the main things to talk about with Gabrielle. And from that point, we fix our attention to the next tropical wave, which has popped up over here towards the eastern Atlantic. Has a 20% chance of development. There is some model guidance that does give this a better chance of getting going, but right now, obviously with chances low, there's not a whole lot of confidence in that at this time. Now, if we were to go ahead and take a look at the tropics hazards outlook over towards our neck of the woods here, you can see that we have relatively low chances for increased activity here, at least over towards the main development region. But one thing that has kind of intrigued me a little bit, and I can't lie, is the signal that I've been seeing over the last week and a half over towards the Yucatan and over towards the Caribbean in the week 2 to 3 outlooks here. There seems to be an increasing level of confidence here, albeit still minute at this point, because I mean we're only just above the 20% threshold here, that something may try to get going over here. I don't expect it to be the kind of situation where we see multiple low pressures turn into tropical waves, tropical storms, etc. But what interests me most with this signal here is the fact that most of the waters here have been untapped. And what I mean by untapped is the fact that we haven't really had much of anything get going over here. So the waters have remained warm pretty much throughout the entire season. Whenever you get tropical storms, especially big hurricanes, like Hurricane Amber was a great example for this. But if we watch the track of Hurricane Aaron, I wish I had the loop of it still. I ended up having to clean out some of my computer memory. But if you watched Hurricane Aaron, especially as she was at major hurricane status, you would actually see a little point here where the sea surface temperatures actually drop behind her track. And that's due to upwelling. Upwelling occurs whenever one of these big storms go through, because what ends up happening is as the storm is feeding off of the warm and moist air across this region here, the sea surface temperature begins to drop because that cold water is being pulled to the surface now. So after a big hurricane comes through, you'll actually end up seeing like these kind of temperatures right in the middle of this area. Eventually, of course, it would warm back up over time. But whenever you start to see areas like this that have been untapped, you can start to get some really impressive sea surface temperatures. And a great example is over here towards Hispaniola, over towards Bahamas, Cuba, where we have 30 plus degrees Celsius temperatures. So to multiply that by 3, that's how you get your Fahrenheit temperature. So we're talking 90 plus degree temperatures, or 90 plus degree sea surface temperatures across this region. So if something can form in mostly ideal conditions, light wind shear, good moisture content in the mid levels of the atmosphere, something could be big here. Now, obviously, there will be less time for this to form, but rapid intensification has been more notable over towards these regions. I'm not trying to alarm anyone, but definitely need to make sure that I drive this point home. Hurricane season's not over yet. Yes, we are past the peak, but what we need to remember is hurricane season ends November 30th. So until then, do not let your guard down. We've got off of the season scot-free at this point, and I hope we can continue to be that, or we continue to have it that way. But just remember, it's not over just yet. So let's not count our chickens before they hatch. So that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at our model data here. We have the GFS and the Euro on the screen, of course. Typical rundown, as we all know, for those of you that are regulars to the channel. And what I want you to pay attention to, of course, the main development region. Wind shear lightens up here, but due to this ridge that we're going to have here, this area of high pressure, anything that forms over here is most likely going to go out to sea. But what you need to pay closer attention to is that region that I just talked about over towards the Yucatan, the Gulf, and the Caribbean. Notice that the wind shear progressively becomes lighter over time. And this is where things kind of get interesting whenever we start seeing something like that across both the GFS and the Euro. Now, the Euro is a little bit more passive on that, but it does look like as we go from like the 25th onward is where the window of opportunity could potentially open up. Now, all of this is assuming that a low pressure area ends up popping up over this region and then prospering enough to where it would hang out over the water to where it could organize itself into a tropical low and beyond here. But if it does, this is where things get interesting, because I've said it pretty much since the beginning of this season. Anything that forms past the 60-degree west line, look what happens at this point. It's just land. So this would be a more notable impact if something were to get more organized over towards this region as well. So at this point, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba, anywhere over towards the Yucatan, I'm looking at you. Need to pay attention. And of course, anyone along the Gulf Coast in particular. So let's go ahead and take a look at our moisture values in the mid levels here. We're looking at our relative humidity at this point. And if we look at both the GFS and European operational runs, notice over time that while we have some dry air in the short term, once we get into the long term with this is where we start to see more of that rich moisture beginning to come back into play here. And as a result, we end up starting to see an environment that looks generally more favorable for tropical development as we get into the long range here. Now, here's where things kind of get really murky, and it's the fact that we're looking into the long range here, and I've seen these models will show a run like this early on, and then as we get closer and closer towards a particular date, like let's say if we go about a week from now, this entire run could change. And this is why I'm mainly telling you not to panic or be too concerned, but do keep an eye on this, because it is a trend that we'll need to keep watch of going forward. I think one reason why we could have that window of opportunity as well is because there are going to be a couple weeks over the lower 48 in general where the weather's going to be fair because of the zonal jet stream that we're expected to have come in. With the zonal jet stream, what tends to happen is the flow will be more just west to east in general. There won't be as much in the way of ridging and troughing, or it won't be quite as prominent. And that often tends to lower the wind shear over towards the Gulf and over towards these regions here as well sometimes. So as a result, again, need to watch the area closely. No guarantees that it just pops off and we end up seeing a nightmare scenario, but always have to be on watch, because again, hurricane season is far from over. We're past the peak, but it's not the end. So last but not least, let's go ahead and take a look at our ensemble members here, and we'll stop with the comparison, at least between two of my favorite models here. This is the European ensemble we're looking at. This is the GFS ensemble. GFS often tends to be a little bit more aggressive with low pressure areas, so it's not surprising to see more favorability in development over here. Now the Euro is a little bit different. Euro tends to be a little bit more conservative, but there are a couple of low pressure features that pop up here around that time frame we were talking about. Do these form into much of anything? It is pretty much impossible to tell at this point. But given the conditions that we saw, I would go as far as to say that we can't put anything off the table at this point here. Like I said, at this range, trying to find a more concrete or more substantial signal is going to be a real challenge. But considering everything else that we've seen so far, it does lead you to kind of raise an eyebrow to that and be like, maybe this should be something that I'm paying a little closer attention to. And then if we also look at the blend of models here, and we're even using AI models at this point as well, what I find most interesting about this is there are a few ensemble members, I think they're mostly AI models at this point, that do kind of go along with the potential of maybe something going here. Mainly over towards this region around the Caribbean. This is also where some of the warmest waters exist too, so it does lead me to have some degree of intrigue. But again, I'm not really sure if I'm ready to jump off that hill, so to speak, and say that okay, something big might happen here. But obviously, given the conditions, the potential is definitely there. We'll also go ahead and take a quick look at what this other tropical wave may have to offer here. A few models, again, as I mentioned before, do give it a chance, but based off the low pressure centers that I've seen here and the pressure numbers I'm seeing, it's not all that impressive. It does look like most of our activity from this point still looks like it's going to be coming from the main development region, at least all the way up towards the end of the month. But as far as imminent concerns for the lower 48 and over towards the Caribbean, right now, let's still say that they remain low. So with that being said, we're going to call this one a video. I'm going to try to rest up here, feel a little better. We have the winter preview coming up tomorrow, and I hope you guys are looking forward to that. Some really interesting stuff in that video, so stay tuned for that tomorrow afternoon. But I will see you guys later. I'm going to try to rest up and get a little bit better, and we'll have more videos up next week. Till then, everyone have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.